My guest today is Dr. Fleet Maull. He is a globally respected mindset teacher. He's the creator of the Neuro-Somatic Mindfulness approach, which is a method that integrates neuroscience with contemplative practice to support peak performance. He is a highly educated and highly experienced meditator and has so many valuable insights that he shares about that in this episode. He also has a book called Radical Responsibility, and he hosts the Radical Responsibility podcast featuring guests like Jack Canfield and Dave Asprey and Dr. Bessel Kolk. Let's see, where do we start with this guy? He's amazing. He also started the Heart Mind Institute, which has summits and courses and different educational offerings. Currently, when we were recording this, he had his Expanded States of Consciousness Mega Summit, which had speakers like Paul Stamets, Dennis McKenna, Deepak Chopra, Stan Groff, Krishna Das, Andrew Weil, and so many others. And on top of all this, he also helps overwhelmed founders and entrepreneurs step out of survival mode and into strategic CEO level leadership. He has over 25 years of experience as a business strategist and is the founder of multiple mission-driven ventures, including an Inc. 5000 company. He developed a high-impact MBA program for bootstrapped entrepreneurs, scaling from 6 to 7 or 8 figures. Man, it's like I don't even know where to start. He also has developed these incredible systems for prisoners and people who work in prisons and others in terms of using neurosomatic mindfulness and radical responsibility and helping them come into a healthier place. Like, he's just been doing a lot of big work, and he himself was in prison for 14 years, and he's going to tell you that story. And kind of how that all led him to where he is now. So if you'd like to check out his book, Radical Responsibility, go to radicalresponsibilitybook.com because there's some freebies there. And then where you find all the summits and all the things he's up to there, you go to heartmind.co. And you can also go to his website, fleetmaull.com. That's Maull. And Fleet is 2 E's. And you can find anything else you would want to know or get in contact with him there. So this is a really powerful episode. Like, listen carefully to the little nuances of what he's saying, because there is just so much wisdom pouring out in this episode. So let's go ahead and dive in. Here is Dr. Fleet Maull. This episode is brought to you by Peluva. So Peluva, Peluva, those are Mark Sisson's new zero drop minimalist shoe with that distinctive 5-toe design. I have been loving them. I've been a longtime fan of barefoot shoes, and I was very resistant to the little 5-toe articulation personally at first, because just being real, I thought they looked really nerdy, and I was like, oh man, yeah, I love Mark so much and I get what he's doing, but I'm not wearing those nerdy shoes. And then Brad Kearns, who's also involved with that project, was like, no, Tara, you got to try them. Tara, you got to try them. Tara, just come on, try them. And I tried them, and I kid you not, I enjoy them so much that I actually like how they look now. Weirdly, I can tell. So like the purpose of that 5-toe articulation is so that your toes can move more dynamically. So with other barefoot shoes, like I've been a long time fan of Vivos, and I'm still a big fan of Vivos, but they have just that big toe box, right? Which is awesome. So I didn't really feel like the 5-toe articulation was necessary, to be honest. But as I've worn them, I have experienced how awesome that is. It was actually been quite surprising for me. And I wore them this morning. I wear them all the time, and I'm really, really enjoying that freedom of movement of my toes. So yeah, Brad and I have been going back and forth. I'm like, dude, I actually love them. And he offered to sponsor the podcast with Peluva and also offer you guys a 15% off code, which I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I will gladly introduce my people to Peluva shoes. So you can use code Coach Tara at peluva.com, or you can just go to peluva, peluva.com/Coach Tara, and you can get that 15% off discount. Make sure you snag some of the socks while you're there, because you're going to need the toe socks. Okay. All right, let's get into the episode. Okay, so Dr. Maull, who I'm going to now switch to Fleet, as you told me I could call you Fleet. You have been up to so much beautiful work for over 50 years now. And I had to do my own mindfulness and presence practice to not get so excited that I got into a frenzy over wanting to ask you so many things. And I'd like to start with meditation because you have quite the background. I was wondering if you could share a bit about your background and then just anything that you want to say about your neurosomatic mindfulness that you have created that might be beneficial to people.
Sure. Well, let's clear up one thing to begin with. I was only 5 when I started, so
Mm.
um,
Yes, that makes sense.
yeah. No, I discovered in 1966 was my sophomore year of high school, and in the summer of 1966, I discovered meditation, Zen Buddhism, uh, cannabis, and LSD, all in that same summer. And so my path kind of went on from there. And I graduated kind of a classic angry young man. This was 1968 when I graduated, very tumultuous year in U.S. history. And when I went headlong into the counterculture of the time, both as a spiritual seeker and also into the whole drug, sex, and rock and roll and the whole countercultural revolution. And I grew up in the Midwest, and it wasn't a hotbed for spirituality or meditation or Buddhism or things like that. So it took me a while to find people of like-minded interest in that part of it. There were plenty of people where I was growing up that were into the counterculture. They were just not so much into the spiritual side of it. Um, but anyway, my path went on like that, and I ended up living in South America as an expat. It had become so alienated, I just left the country. I was also looking for to really connect with something genuine because I remembered in my early childhood feeling really plugged into reality and life being magical and awesome. And it all just kind of went away. Maybe when I started school or maybe having to do with my some alcoholism in my family, I'm not sure. But anyway, it went away and I wasn't happy about that. I was always looking to plug back into something real. And of course, the drugs and the music, the counterculture had some elements of feeling like that. And some of it's genuine and some of it's kind of mirage-like. And but if you got a big hole in your gut and you're angry and so forth, and trauma in your background, that can set you up for all kinds of addictive propensities and things like that. So, at any rate, I ended up living in Latin America, and it's really there that I started meeting other people that were interested in meditation and Buddhism and things like that, more of a spiritual life. And so I was trying to practice on my own out of books, living way up in the mountains in Peru, in the Andes, I was getting into it, but I realized, I wasn't making a lot of deep progress because I didn't have any support and really any teachers, and I was just working with the books that were available then, which were very few compared to what's available now.
Right.
But then I heard about the founding of Naropa University, then Naropa Institute, 1974, by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the renowned Tibetan meditation master. And I just saw that and I knew I had to go there. And
Mhm.
so I did go there, and I ended up doing a 3-year clinical training program there in Buddhist and Western psychology that later was called contemplative psychotherapy. And I became a student of Trungpa Rinpoche, and he became my first teacher. And so I continued deepening my practice, became a very close student of his, spent about half the year on retreats and doing intensive training and programs, meditation, and the other half of the year being in this kind of crazy counterculture, you know, person that was doing smuggling and all the rest of it. Um, and before I could untangle all that, I earned my way into a federal prison sentence, and I actually was in federal prison from 1985 to 1999. And that
Wow.
really became my honest ashram time, my monastery time. And not that prisons are really like a monastery, but at least I was confined to one place, and all the craziness stopped for a lot of reasons, mostly because my son was 9 years old when I got myself locked up, and I was absolutely
Mhm.
devastated over what I'd done to him and that he was going to grow up without a dad. And I was
Mhm.
initially sentenced to 30 years with no parole. And I
Wow.
thought my life, so I knew it was over. I was 35, and they said I'd be 65 before I had any chance of release. Fortunately, under the old law, I was sentenced prior to 1987 in the federal system. You got a lot of good time if you stayed out of trouble, which I managed to do. So I actually ended up serving 14 and a half years. Uh, but that was a time of deep transformation for me. I really focused on practice and service. My day job was teaching school, helping other prisoners learn to read, get their GED, study for college courses. I was started a meditation group, was teaching meditation twice a week. This was a maximum security federal prison hospital in the height of the AIDS epidemic. So we started the first hospice program in a prison anywhere in the world, and that was a big part of my life was supporting men who were dying there over the next 14 years. And so I was leading this very dedicated life. I was practicing 2, 3 hours a day of meditation, involved in service, doing the teaching, working with my own recovery through 12-step work and so forth. So it was a profound time of transformation. I also knew once I figured out how the good time worked, and actually my sentence got reduced on appeal because they knocked off one count, so it got reduced from 30 to 25. So by the time I figured all that out and I knew I would be roughly 50 years old when I got out, I knew it was going to be tough to start a life at 50. And I knew I really had to train myself. But I also was really committed to serving that community I was in, right? And as well as leaving any legacy for my son other than just his dad went to prison, right? So so that paid off. I got out in 1999. I've had nothing but opportunity ever since, been traveling the world ever since and teaching and offering all kinds of training and programs. But I really very grateful for the lineages that I was introduced to and practiced in and really deepened my practice during those years and also began to get really interested in neuroscience at that time, and also in deeply embodied approaches to meditation, including all the inner yogic work and working with the subtle energy channels and all of that. So since I've been out, which is now 26 years, I've been evolving a model that deeply integrates the classic mindfulness awareness meditation practices of the Zen tradition, the Tibetan tradition, the Vipassana tradition, as well as studying all the Vedic forms of Vedic meditation, all the current secular non-dual traditions. Um, from the Tibetan tradition, the formless practices of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, from Zen, Shikantaza, and really anything. I've studied all the Abrahamic traditions, anything, any meditation technologies out there. I've studied with it and probably worked with a teacher on it, probably done a retreat in it, and it's been my passion for more than 50 years. And then I've really been integrating that with my fascination with current neuroscience and also now biofield science. And so that resulted in something called Neuro-Somatic Mindfulness, which we're finding really helps people accelerate their meditation journey in big ways. Because I think I don't have the data on it, but I suspect, the secular mainstream mindfulness movement, as it's known, introduces a lot of new people to mindfulness. And then there's the whole world of yoga, and a lot of people get introduced to hatha yoga and then get introduced to mindfulness. But I think probably the majority of them don't keep going with the meditation because they find it hard, it's boring, their knees hurt, they're not getting results. And really for me, I guess I was just driven when I started because I remember the first few years of my path in meditation. It was like that. It was hard, it was boring. I was I wasn't really experiencing a whole lot, but I kept going, fortunately, right? So,
Mhm.
but what we're finding is with this deeply embodied approach, and we understand the neuroscience of why people get results so much more quickly, and thus they're inspired to keep going. And our students that come to be introduced to neurosomatic mindfulness, uh, not only do new students get into it much more quickly and expect benefits very quickly, but we have a lot of people who've been practicing for 5, 6, 7 years, but feel their practices, they know it's helpful, but doesn't feel like it's really necessarily going anywhere deeper. They're not having the experiences they read about in the books. Um,
Right.
but we have a lot of people. In fact, I would say probably the majority of people on our program have been practicing 23 years, 20, 30 years, and have done a lot of retreats. And they're experiencing incredible transformation in their practice, incredible deepening. So it's very gratifying to see that. And,
Mm.
it's my passion. It's completely radically transformed my life, continues to do so. But really happy to see the impact it's having for other people. So sorry for that long-winded response, but
No, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure we'll hit a little bit more on the the prison part of things and the lessons learned when we shift into your book, talking about your book, Radical Responsibility, just to hang on meditation and this neurosomatic mindfulness for a second. Can you describe like what you mean by neurosomatic mindfulness? Like what?
Right. So obviously soma is body, right?
Mhm.
And that word can be understood in a number of ways. Neuro references that it's neuroscientifically informed, right? And um, I would say the key principle in neurosomatic mindfulness is embodiment, but it's not just embodiment, it's going very, very deeply in the body. So
Mhm.
it's activating deep levels of what's known as interoception or interoceptive awareness, which is the body's capacity to feel itself from the inside out, as it were, right? So we're all aware of interoception because it's how we know when we're hungry or tired or sleepy. It's when we experience pain in the body, like a headache or indigestion. All that is interoception. But unfortunately, absent some discomfort, we generally ignore the body. We pretty much ignore the external
Yeah.
sensate landscape of the body as well, but especially the internal landscape of the body. We live very, in Western culture, we really have been enculturated to live up in our heads and live out there, and much to our own detriment because it creates a world of disconnection. We're disconnected from ourselves. We're disconnected from the earth. We're disconnected from each other. And we know from current neuroscience, the more deeply embodied we become, the more access we have to interoceptive awareness, the more we're able to connect with others, the more we're able to create connection and intimacy with others. So, but the real key here, though, in terms of meditation, is that directing our attention activates a neural network called the task positive network. And that neural network has um, a mutually inhibitory or mutually antagonistic relationship with a network called the default mode network. And the default mode network has its place, but it's the neural network that's active in the brain when we don't direct our attention. We just let the mind wander. Now, if we can completely free ourselves of any fear and anxiety and let the mind wander in that kind of safe, protected space, it can be a tremendous source of creativity. In fact, a lot of insights and creativity that artists and others come out of the default mode network. But for most of it, it's pervaded with fear and anxiety and stress all the time. And so it's that chatterbox between our ears that's constantly worrying about the future, fantasizing about the future, ruminating about the past, constant self-creating. It's the source of continual reinforcement of the sense of separate self, and it's the source of all our self-created stress and anxiety. And when most people try to learn to meditate, that's what they struggle with, right? And
Mhm.
and they keep bouncing back and forth between lost in thought and trying to come back to the breath or to the body, and they find it very difficult because we're all by the time we get to meditation, we're already addicted to that noise in our head. We think that's who we are, and so it's very difficult to overcome that. And if you struggle with it, it just makes it worse. Like trying to stop thinking. Some people think in meditation you're supposed to stop thinking. Well, it's not possible and it doesn't work anyway. And it's counterproductive to even try. It's counterproductive to struggle with our thoughts in any way. So with good meditation instruction, the instruction is just let your thoughts come and go, right?
Yeah.
Just let it all come and go. Well, the problem is that means you're going to get down the rabbit hole into distraction and lose awareness unless you've stabilized your attention, right? And
Mhm.
so when you can activate the task positive network, then the default mode network, to the extent you activate that, the default mode network goes offline naturally. And the mind quiets down naturally. You don't need to struggle with it. Now, we can all sustain attention for a moment. Like your audience might, I'm sure almost everyone's probably tried to thread a needle at one point, right? So maybe you lick the thread, get a point out, and you're trying to get it through the eye of the needle. And at least for a moment, your mind gets really quiet because you're
Yeah.
concentrating, right?
Right.
That's the shift. That's the shift right there from the active default mode network to activating the task positive network. But we can only sustain it for a second or two, right? Well, when we develop deep embodiment, the deeply felt physicality of the body, like really feeling it deeply, that creates an ongoing activation of the task positive network, such
Mhm.
that the default mode network goes offline and the mind quiets down and our attention stabilizes. And when
Mhm.
our attention stabilizes, we then start getting access to deep states of awareness. And along the way, our brain and nervous system is learning those pathways and developing more robust pathways and neural networks to go directly to attention stabilization, and from there into deeper states of awareness, and from there into deep, profound states of flow, what in the Eastern traditions are called samadhis. There's many, many levels of that. So there's lots of ways to sort of leapfrog our way into expanded consciousness. There's intensive breath work, there's psychedelic medicines and other experiences where you can temporarily, or sometimes it spontaneously happens, or being out in nature, or ecstatic dance. There's lots of ways to temporarily leapfrog your way in there, but it hasn't changed your brain, or it temporarily changes it, right? And many people have had profound experiences in psychedelics, for example, and I'm not putting that down at all. We do a big summit on psychedelic psychotherapy, and it's incredible how that's helping people, but it's helping people because it's combined with therapy, right? So you can have lots of psychedelic experiences and not really change very much,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
And because it's a temporary state. But when you access those expanded states of consciousness, deep states of awareness, deep states of flow through the body and through the brain, you are changing your neural architecture as you're doing it. And you're developing a new neural architecture that gives you abiding access to that. And so that changes everything. The other important thing to keep in mind is, most people start a meditation practice with some kind of mindfulness of breath, mindfulness of body, right? Or even if they're using some kind of mantra practice, right? There's an object of mindfulness. They notice the mind wanders that come back. They notice the mind wanders that come back, right? Um, and because the pull of our active development network is so strong, that is really a struggle. Well, again, accessing deep embodiment deactivates the developmental network, makes it so much easier. But also, in directing our attention to the breath or the body, it's very important to understand that initially we will not actually be experiencing the breath or the body. We think we are, but we're not. We're actually experiencing a conceptual overlay on the breath and the body.
Yeah.
We're observing or relating with the concept of breath, the concept of body, because the way our brain works, our brain continually has to economize its energy because our brain is exposed to trillions of bits of data all the time. Right, this incredible flow of trillions of bits, most of which we're never conscious of, because our brain's job is to filter out everything that we don't need to survive. So we're all experiencing this particular reality, which our brains have evolved to show us so that we can survive as life forms and as beings. And because as humans, we all have essentially the same brains, similar brains, we see this consensual reality, although we all have our own versions of it, right? So that's what the brain is showing us. And like we're out for a walk, we notice a tree. Do we really see that tree? Or does the brain very quickly replace it with a conceptual image of a tree or an oak tree or a maple tree? But
Right.
do we really connect with or really see or even experience that actual living entity, that tree? We don't. We experience this conceptual overlay. And in deep meditation, we begin to distinguish that. We begin to be able to recognize it. My first meditation teacher, again, the Tibetan master Trungpa Rinpoche, um, he distinguished between what he called the psychosomatic body, which is this conceptual overlay on our experience of the body in particular, the psychosomatic body, and then what he just called body, which was the direct experience of the sensate experience that we call body. There is no thing called body. There's no such thing as body. Body is just a word or concept, but there's this moment to moment lived experience, which is actually energy at the deep level. We experience it because of the way our brains are wired, and in this particular row, we experience it as materiality, but it's really just energy. And but to really experience it directly, we have to sort of make a gentle effort to get through that conceptual layer first and into direct experience. And
Mm-hmm.
when we do, that really activates the task positive network. And
Mm-hmm.
it also is so compelling. The direct experience of the inner sensate landscape of the body is so really fascinating and compelling and vivid and magical that it pulls us in, and it's actually more interesting and more compelling than all that chatter up between our ears, right? So it really pulls us in, and we have continual activation, and thus attention stabilizes. We deepen our awareness. We have access to deep sleeps of flow, And then over time, we're able to move from what begins as an effortful mindfulness practice. All practice has to begin with some intentional, effortful self-regulation, right? We're regulating our attention. But over time, it becomes effortless because the brain and nervous system is learning to do it without effort. And that's really key because to go into the deeper states of meditation and the more expanded states of consciousness or awareness to really experience deep states of awakening, it's all about relaxation and letting go. If there's effort at some point, we can't begin without effort, and along the way, but we need less and less effort because at some point effort is counterproductive. It gets in the way, right? So because our brain and nervous system is learning to do this, it becomes more and more effortless, and we move from a kind of dualistic, effortful self-regulation to a much more non-dual, effortless mindfulness and awareness. And that's what really starts to give us access to profound transformation and possibilities of awakening. And also because we're going into the body, right? We're feeling the body at deeper and deeper levels, subtler and subtler levels. We're all into the emotional body, and we're going into where all our trauma is stored. So along the way, we're also in these deeper states of flow. Our nervous system is untangling itself, the trauma is releasing, right? And we're going from gross physical sensation to subtler and subtler and subtler sensation. So now we're starting to get into subtle body, subtle mind, what in the Eastern traditions would be pranic or etheric body, or in Western science, we're starting to call the biofield. We're getting into these subtle levels by going through the body, right? And so that's how neurosomatic mindfulness works, and that's why it works, and it's why it gives people results so much more quickly by taking this approach of going through the body.
Wow, that really speaks to me. Thank you for sharing all of that, first of all. And um, I've been, I definitely have not been meditating even remotely close or, on the journey you've been, but I have been meditating daily, more than once a day, usually as a practice for, I think, about 7 years now. And because the body is kind of a thing for me, like I started to drift into this practice of like, I don't know how to like describe it perfectly, but the best way I can say is like when you go sit next to your animal, if you have a pet and you like, there's no words, you're not talking to them. It's kind of like the needle, like you're just with them or with your child. You're just, it's almost like a nervous system connect, like I'm with you. And that's how I've been, almost like a little submarine in my body is how I would put it. Like just being with the different areas. Like I'm not saying anything, I'm not doing anything, I'm just there. And then I will kind of go into a gratitude. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then I'll ask it if there's anything it wants me to know or anything it needs. And if I get anything, I say, thank you so much for letting me know. And then my job is to act on that. And that has resulted in not only some, I won't go into stories, but some unbelievable magic, quote unquote, magical, really cool things happen in my health. But it's also created a relationship with my body where I see it as the innate intelligence that it is. There's a relationship of mutual respect. So I'm really interested, not only when you talked about that conceptual, I'm like, oh, is that what I'm doing though? Have I ever gotten into the body? Like, I'm very intrigued. Just letting you know, it really speaks to me because that's intuitively where I've come with meditation. And try to explain that so many times to clients. I ended up just calling it my higher meditation method. I'm just trying to connect them to their bodies. So yeah, I will definitely check out your neurosomatic mindfulness and dive into that more because it just really resonates.
Well, what you're also speaking to, you're speaking to co-regulation there. You're co-regulating with a pet or with a child, right? And
Yes.
which also self-regulation and co-regulation are they intermingle and they reinforce each other, right? And
Mm.
so, people have different goals with meditation. Meditation could just be to relieve our stress or improve our
Yeah.
overall health and well-being. Some people, believe in possibilities of full awakening and complete consciousness or enlightenment, these kind of ideas. And there's everything in between, right? And it's all good. Um, I think as human beings, really becoming a conscious adult human being, just even at a basic level, we have to learn to self-regulate. And if we don't learn to self-regulate, then we're being regulated. We all live in this interface between our childhood conditioning, whatever that was, and for most of us, it was a mixed bag, and then the world around us. And if our childhood conditioning was completely benevolent, and we live in a completely benevolent bubble in the world somewhere, then just being there kind of mechanically and mindlessly might work out more or less okay. But for most of us, our childhood conditioning wasn't completely benevolent, and the world around us certainly isn't. So we're just kind of in there getting buffeted around, and we suffer under the illusion that we're conscious adult human beings making free, conscious adult decisions all day long, and it's not true. If only it were, but it's not. Stimulus A1 comes in, we respond with response B2 every time. We're highly programmed, and we're programmed by our childhood conditioning, most of which we get before we're 7, right? So we had no
Mhm.
choice about it. And then we're just in this state of reaction to the world around us. And we think we're actually consciously deciding, and we're not. It's all programmed, right? And it's a can be a pretty rough ride. So really the pathway into becoming an actual conscious adult is learning to self-regulate our own autonomic nervous system. That's where it all begins. And most people have probably heard of the autonomic nervous system today, but it's a part of our nervous system that operates all the complex systems in our body, the most complex organism in the known universe, the human body, brain, and nervous system. And it has these two branches. One upregulates. We need that for alertness, but then it goes into stress and all the way into fight or flight and panic and so forth. And then the other one, the parasympathetic, is the downregulating relaxation, rest, and digest response. And they're both happening all the time. And if we don't learn to regulate it, then everybody but us is regulating it, right? The world around us, the news, whatever, is regulating it, right? And so it's easy to learn to regulate it. You've referenced breath work, right? So by simply manipulating our breath, we can regulate our autonomic nervous system because when we breathe in, there's a slight upregulation of the sympathetic branch. When we breathe out, there's a slight activation of the parasympathetic, which is down-regulating for our nervous system, right? So just emphasizing the out breath, we're going to calm down, right? More parasympathetic activation. So there's many, many different breath work people may have experienced, simple techniques like straw breathing or 4-7-8 breathing or box breathing. And then there's many more advanced techniques. But we can learn if we're getting a little too stressed out or too activated, just switch our breath in.
Mhm.
Or if we're feeling lethargic, kind of spaced out, we can do a little like rapid abdominal breathing, and it'll wake our nervous system up. So we can learn these tools for self-regulation, and and if we do that in an embodied way, if we develop more access to the inner landscape of the body as we're doing that, they'll be even more powerful. And when
Mhm.
we do that, if we do that regularly, and if we take responsibility for, continually regulating our autonomic nerves throughout the day, like I'm doing breath work all day long in one form or another, right? So when we do that, we're changing our neural architecture. We're transforming our nervous system and our brain so that self-regulation starts to become more natural, right? It requires less effort on our part. Where there may be times when we still, something is really kind of affecting us, we're really need to stop and do some breath work, but it'll start to become more natural to us, right? And then to the extent that we have this capacity to self-regulate and keep what Stephen Porges in his polyvagal work calls our social engagement system online, then what we're communicating to the world is safety and good regulation. And that invites other people into a state of good regulation. And now we're co-regulating, right?
Yeah.
We can co-regulate with the people we're speaking with, hanging out with our children, with our pets. And so all this is enhancing our well-being. And we can go a lot deeper with it. We can go all the way into the quantum field with it. And the thing about it, to get people interested in meditation, perhaps just beyond um, stress relief, and no problem if that's what people are interested in. It's very necessary, right? It's very necessary. Um,
Mhm.
at the same time, um, at the deepest level of our being, we're not broken, we're not traumatized. There's nothing, there's no mistakes. I'm talking about the deepest, deepest, subtlest levels of our being. In modern science, one way to talk about that is the quantum field, things like that. But however you want to think about it. But if you can imagine plugging back into that level, right? It's almost like if you imagine we had a cord, on us, and at night we would just plug in, right? And like computers, it used to be you had to run a defragmentation program to clean up all the broken circuits and everything.
Right.
Now, when you put it to, if you put your computers, that's one reason it's good to put your computer to sleep at night because it does that. Same thing
Mhm.
our brain does is we get good sleeping. It sloughs off all the broken stuff in the brain, right? So, but imagine you could just plug back in and you would reset, get a reset. So all that trauma, all that stuff's getting untangled, all the stress, all the trauma, it's all getting worked out and healed, right? Well, we can do that through meditation because when we drop into the deepest states of flow in an abiding way, we're dropping back into that level where our whole system is healing itself and where we access the innate healing intelligence of the body that it completely heals itself. We don't need anything to do it. The body will heal itself. But also we drop into a level of our being where it becomes absolutely unmistakable to us that we're not broken, we don't need fixing, and all the messages we've gotten of not enoughness our whole life were complete lies and that
Right.
we are perfect just as we are. Now, we're a life form, so we're designed to evolve and change and grow and thrive and learn things. But foundationally, we're fine just the way we are. We're perfect just the way we are. We're sacred beings. We're completely sacred, profound energy. And when you have that experience, not just you read about it in a book or somebody tells you, but you actually experience it directly in your own being, it changes everything,
Yeah.
changes everything about your life and
Mhm.
how you see yourself and how you experience others. Because once you realize that's who you are, you realize all beings are that way, no matter how they're showing up in life. And even if they're showing up in really problematic ways, underneath all that, there's this beautiful being, right? It's just they
Mhm.
don't have access to it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I want to, you talked about like co-regulation and being able to change our state. And I kind of want to shift this over to radical responsibility because that's the name of your book. And obviously, if you're going to have radical responsibility, you're going to need to be able to regulate yourself and not play the victim and blame everybody else. And that's why, and this is why, and whatnot. And I also want to tee this up by, sharing with the audience, emphasizing the fact that you not only did the work while you were in the prisons, which is really cool and slightly reminding me of like Viktor Frankl a little bit, like, okay, this is the situation I'm in, and we'll hear about the radical responsibility piece, but you also really, were able to bring a lot of beauty to yourself and others. And then after, can you just share a little bit of what you've been doing with prisoners since then?
Yeah, and I have a signed copy of Viktor Frankl's book over here in my
No
book
way.
right
He
here.
He's like my one of my ultimate
Uh,
heroes.
I didn't meet him personally, but we started the first hospice program, as I mentioned, in a prison anywhere. And one of the trainers that came in to train us from the outside, she knew Viktor Frankl, and she got him to sign
Wow,
this copy of his book for me.
so
Man,
special. Wow.
yeah, very inspirational book for me and for obviously millions and millions of people.
Mhm.
So, yeah, today I started an organization called Prison Dharma Network while I was in prison. And today it has three divisions: Prison Mindfulness Institute, which brings mindfulness and meditation, and a program we call Path of Freedom, which is mindfulness-based emotional intelligence to prisoners all around the world. And then we have Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety, where we bring the same thing to the people who work in the system, the correctional officers, probation and parole officers, police, community police, other first responders. So we have a program called Mindfulness-Based Wellness and Resiliency that we bring to public safety professionals and other first responders. And then we have Engaged Mindfulness Institute, which trains mindfulness teachers in trauma-informed approaches to bringing mindfulness to populations where there's been a lot of marginalization and trauma exposure and so
Mhm.
forth. So these are three divisions of that nonprofit I started way back in 1989 while I was in prison. So it's a thriving nonprofit today, and we have an executive director that runs it day to day, but I still do a lot of teaching and have overall board responsibility. But the main thing I do it these days, actually before the pandemic, I used to go into prison still quite a bit. But since then, because they shut prisons to outside volunteers and contractors during the pandemic, and they've kind of reopened, but a lot of prisons have gotten much more restrictive, and they're at any rate, uh, what I've been doing mostly the past now, I guess, 6 years. Well, I've been doing it for about 14 years now, but especially for the last 6 years, mostly just working with correctional officers and probation parole officers.
Mhm.
So I still do that. I go up to Canada frequently and train correctional officers up there, and also online, I do a lot of training with public safety professionals. Mhm.
Wow, that's awesome. I just wanted to highlight that. And it's amazing. And my 19-year-old activist daughter, who's just up into her ears of frustration with the prison systems in America, will be very happy to hear about that. Okay, let's give some time to radical responsibility. What was the subtitle of the book?
How to move beyond blame, fearlessly live your highest purpose, and become an unstoppable force for good.
Amazing. Okay, because so can you share with us the tenets of the book? I know we don't have a ton of time, but as much
Well,
as we
it
can.
was birthed in prison. That's where, when I got to prison, um, uh, I could have had a big victim story. I did a lot of people's time. Um, I actually was never directly caught, but other people were. I quit, and then other people continued, and they got caught, and they decided to invite me to the party, as it were, right?
Okay.
And so at some point, I knew I was going to be investigated. I knew I was going to be indicted. And it was actually, I went to my teacher with the question of, should I escape or turn myself in? What should I do? And he said, if you want to continue as a practitioner, as my student, you're going to have to turn yourself in, and you can still be a student, you can still practice, and I can still work with you. And so that's what I did. First time I ever really took anybody's advice in my life. Um, and I'm grateful I did actually, even though it was a very challenging ride. But um, uh, so um, when I got there, uh, I mean, first of all, so I did turn myself in, and there was probably everybody. The way the the government works, they target one person who usually is the person who will not cooperate with them, and that becomes the kingpin, and everybody else above and below becomes co-conspirators, and they give deals to everybody, and so I probably did 30, 40 people's time, right? And I could have had a big victim story about that. And also, when the government prosecutes you, they play hardball. They break all the rules, they break the laws, they threaten, they do whatever. They don't care. They're playing hardball, and they make no bones about it, right? They say you're bad guys. We're playing hardball. We're going to put you away, right? And so I could have focused on all that, but I knew it wasn't going to take me anywhere, absolutely anywhere. And I knew I'd worked. I wasn't innocent. And in fact, I would have pled guilty to anything but the so-called kingpin charge I was charged with, because I really didn't think I deserved that charge. But at any rate, I was found guilty on all counts, and I realized I could focus on all that would get me absolutely nowhere. Also,
Mhm.
once I got to prison, I realized I was in an incredibly negative environment where everybody had a huge victim story. I mean, society sees prisoners as the perpetrators. They all got a big victim story, and most of them have been victimized, and most of them were victimized as children. That's how they end up in trouble, right? I mean, most of them with horrendous backgrounds, right? And many feel they're over prosecuted. Many have. And then there's so much racism in our system and so forth, right? So anyway, they've got a big victim story. And when you meet somebody in prison, often you meet somebody and you go for a walk after lunch on a prison yard, and the usual ritual. They share their victim story, how their lawyer screwed them over, their Paul partner screwed, and then you share your victim story, and you bond around your victim stories. Well, after I went through that ritual once or twice, I didn't want any more to do with that, which maybe wasn't very compassionate, but I didn't want to hear my story. I didn't really want to hear those stories from them. And I didn't want to reinforce that. It's not who I wanted to be. And so I realized that I had to take like 300% radical ownership for having got myself in there, what I was going to do with my time there, and any possibility I'd have of any life I could create when I got, if I even survived. And I had no surety that I would survive my time, because men were dying of AIDS and all kinds of other illnesses all around me. Men were dying of violence in the prison. I had no surety that I would survive my time. But if I could survive and was going to be able to create any kind of life for myself in prison and beyond prison, I knew it was going to have to be based on this radical ownership. And so that's the approach I took. And based on that, I didn't waste any time stewing in a sense of victimization or blaming anybody. And instead, actually, I used a meditative practice from the Tibetan tradition called Tong Lin, exchanging self for other. For anyone that I did sense I felt any enmity or resentment towards, I included them in my practice, where you're taking on their suffering and wishing them the very best. And I
Mm.
kept doing those practices with anybody that ever came up in my mind until I had not 1 ounce of negativity towards anyone at all. and
Mm.
it really felt a sense of universal love and compassion for all. And so I worked really hard at that. And also with that approach, I really want, a lot of people when you're in prison, you just consider it downtime. You just want to get through it somehow. So most people in prison, they kind of numb out, they get into a routine, they sleep a lot or whatever, just to try to not be there, right? And,
Mhm.
I had already had enough training in consciousness and meditation that I didn't want to throw away a huge chunk of my life. And as painful as it was to be present and be there, I wanted to experience it fully. And I also wanted to do something and really make a contribution. So in figuring out how to do that, I used radical responsibility. And I realized that everybody in there, my fellow prisoners and the prison officials, the authorities, all were human beings, all had basic goodness, no matter how deeply hidden it was. And that the way I was going to be able to do anything was going to be able to come from that place and connect with people's humanity, right? So in doing so, I was able to start two national organizations while I was in prison, which you're not supposed to be able to do. Start the first hospice program in a prison anywhere. Started National Prison Hospice Association, which got that model out. By the time I was released, there were about 75 hospice programs in state and federal prisons. And, it's one thing that I can kind of, if I had to die tomorrow, I could be content that I'd done something meaningful in my life, right? And I didn't do it by myself. I did it with others, and I was at the right place at the right time. But nonetheless, that's completely transformed medical care and end-of-life care in the prison systems in the U.S. And it came not by blaming people, not by fighting with the prison. It came by connecting with people's humanity and really taking ownership and figuring out what's the most creative way to connect with people and to inspire them to move forward with something that makes sense to do. I was able to start all kinds of programs in that prison and able to help a lot of people and create an amazing opportunity for myself when I got out. And it all came by focusing all my attention on, no matter how difficult a situation is, no matter how corrupt it is, or no matter how ignorant or insensitive or how wrong-headed the people I'm trying to deal with are, no matter what's going on, focusing on one and only one question: what can I do? What can I do? What's the most creative way I can interact with this situation that's going to lead to the best results for myself and others? That
Yeah.
became my laser-like focus, and it led into a life of profound transformation while I was in and huge opportunity when I've gotten out. And it's impacted really hundreds of thousands of people. I feel millions of people, actually. I feel very grateful uh, to have had the opportunity to do that, right? But it's all come out of that focusing on ownership. And it's not to say that other people don't create challenges for us. It's not to say that you couldn't reasonably say, well, this thing happened. I'm willing to own, I contributed 40%, 60%, 70%, but by golly, that other person, sure. Or there may be even situations where, everybody would agree that something happens to me, it landed on my head, and I really had nothing to do with it, unless it was like past life karma, and who knows about such things, right? But, they would agree. Or maybe you can see I did do something a little dumb, but what happened was so horrible, so unjust, it should never happen to anybody anyway. So this is not about self-blame, right?
Hmm.
It's really the key distinction in radical responsibility is to realize it has absolutely nothing to do with blame. It's obviously not about blaming others, but it's not even one iota about blaming ourselves, and it's certainly not about blaming victims. It's simply where is the only place I have any real power to affect things in a positive way? That's by focusing on my own choices. And in my only choice, in some cases, my choice may be to seek justice, but I can seek justice or, create boundaries. Or maybe if something really horrible has happened to me, maybe I need to get a lot of affirmation. I need a lot of support. I need people to recognize, yes, you were victimized. I need a lot of support. I can still do that in a way that doesn't reinforce my victim identity, right? And
Right.
there's so many elements in our society today that want to come to people who have been traumatized and they just want to reinforce their victim identities. Like, become a victim, wave your victim flag, and you can get your power that way. Well, you can get some superficial power for a way, but then you're buying into a lifelong mindset of that. And it's not to say that people aren't victimized. People are terribly victimized in our society, and there's children are victimized. And of course, this is about adults. This isn't about children, but um, and there's tremendous injustice in life. But for any one individual, their destiny is determined by the choices they make every day. not by the circumstances. And these ideas have been around for a long time. I mean, Viktor Frankl made that very clear. His experience of being in the most infamous death camp of the Holocaust, Auschwitz, where I go every year to as one of the leaders of a bearing witness retreat. We've been doing there for 26
Mm.
years, I think, at Auschwitz every
Oh, wow.
um, but also all the way back to Marcus Aurelius, often considered the last good Roman emperor and one of the Stoic philosophers. You know, his whole book of meditations is basically along that theme. And paraphrasing one of his statements was, you know, the majority of people feel their destiny is created by their circumstances, but in fact, it's not. It's created by their response to those circumstances, right? Or their unconscious reaction to those
Yeah.
circumstances. And so it's really about the power of choice. And we you might think it might sound like a burden, right? Oh, I don't get to blame. I can't blame all the, and I got to take all this on myself. It's not a burden at all. It's the doorway into freedom. It's the doorway into complete freedom. And the only place we have any real freedom, right? And it interfaces with mind training, awareness training, meditation training, because to recognize all the ways which we can subtly slip back into a victim mindset of some kind, which is completely human. It's not about beating ourselves up for that. It's just recognizing it because we can recognize, go, oh, yeah, there I go, shift, oh, shift. And every time we
Right.
shift out of a victim mindset back into choice and empowering ourselves through choice, we're changing our brain. And it gets easier and easier and easier over time. And we find ourselves more and more naturally living that way. We're always going to get triggered into, it happens to me all the time, right? Something's happened and I find myself, and I go, oh, yeah, shift, right? I don't want to waste any time there. Yeah, maybe we can this also has to be grounded in self-compassion, right? Which is
Yeah.
why I teach lots of forms of self-compassion meditation, the traditional loving kindness practices, and other self-compassion practices, because otherwise, trying to embrace something like radical ownership or radical responsibility could trigger self-blaming. And
Right.
we've probably all picked up a lot of that in our upbringing, right? And
Mhm.
so we have to really work on our self-compassion so we have the resilience to embrace that kind of radical ownership in our lives without triggering ourselves into self-blame. Because it's not about self-blame. It's all about choice. Where do I have power? What is the most creative way I can respond to whatever is going on? And again, which could be to seek justice, but seeking justice in an empowered way from choice without being all caught up in the victim story is very different. And I think ultimately more effective than when we try to do it from our victim mindset.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for the I call self-compassion the gatekeeper of personal evolution. Like if you don't, it's like you can't because
Essential.
you won't even touch stuff because you know you're going to be so mean to yourself about it. You don't even want to look at it, right? So I love that. And you also added a really important insight was also the practice you shared of feeling the compassion towards others, I think is a critical aspect of getting out of that victim mindset. Cause now you're coming from through like the eyes of God, if you will, or like this all loving, unconditional love energy where somebody gets to be a human and you can still find that commonality. So you have that for yourself. You're able to practice getting that for others. It's a lot easier to take ownership or responsibility when that is established. So I appreciate you sharing both of those deep insights and also pulling in the self-regulation and the consciousness and the mindfulness and the meditation. It all has to be part of it for that to go well. So bravo.
Two of the most powerful practices we can do for our own spiritual evolution are gratitude and forgiveness. You mentioned the gratitude practice before, absolutely essential. I do a whole gratitude routine every morning, intermingled with breath work and lots of different things, but also forgiveness. And people often have a lot of confusion around forgiveness. I think forgiveness means you're letting somebody else off the hook, or it's kind of okay what they did, or no, it wasn't okay, but I forget, it's really
Yeah.
not about forgiveness is about ourselves. Forgiveness is about not holding on to resentments, right? It's also about shifting out of the entitlement that we think we somehow we're entitled to have everybody be nice to us. It'd be nice if the world was like, we're not entitled with anything. Now, it's nice if cultures can come together and create laws and regulations and rights and so forth, and they all come to some agreement. But we're not really entitled to any of that. We have to co-create it. And as a community, a culture, a society, we can try to co-create it with each other the best we can. And that's what civilization is all about. But it's not like we're entitled to it, right? It's what we create, right? And so forgiveness is about, the opposite of forgiveness, which is holding on to resentments, right? Is that saying that's attributed to Lao Tzu, going back thousands of years in Chinese history, um, that holding on to resentments is like taking poison and hoping the other person will die, right? Right? We're harming ourselves, right? So forgiveness can just be, I'm going to set this over here because I don't want it running my life anymore. So I'm going to let it go. I'm going to forgive. I'm going to let go. I'm going to find some way to dissolve it, let it go, so it's no longer running the show. I'm not giving this person free rent in my head and making them, nachos and guacamole every night and giving them a big screen free tree and chewing away with my resentments, right? I choose to let it go out of my own enlightened self-interest. Now, we might want to go to another level. We might want to internally really try to work with that, get to a place where we really do feel no enmity toward that person. We can really feel compassion, and we can see there's a suffering being who acted in such a way that wasn't helpful to me, or maybe it was harmful to me, but I see it came out of their suffering, and I'm really able to dissolve that, see their goodness, and wish them the best. I may still not want to, or it may not be appropriate to have a relationship with them again, but that's another level. And then the final level, especially if it's a family member of some time, and even then, sometimes it's not appropriate, but I may actually be able to reconcile with someone, right? And so there's all these different levels of forgiveness. But forgiveness is about reopening our own heart for ourselves and also for others. So, really, two of the most profound practices for our own spiritual evolution, for our own freedom, are the cultivation of gratitude, which is the opposite of entitlement and resentment, and cultivation of forgiveness, which is the opposite of enmity and resentment.
Thank you. Yeah, gratitude and meditation practice are part of my coaching. And I always tell my clients, I'm like, I would never waste your time. Trust me. I know you already got too much on your plate, actually. I love that. I don't know who the quote is originally from. Some people say it's Rumi. I don't know. But like, if you don't have time, I'm paraphrasing, if you don't have time to meditate for an hour, then you should meditate for two. I'm like, I'm only asking 10 minutes. I'm only asking 3 items of written gratitude and how you feel besides grateful when you think of those things. And it's because it's so much bang for your buck. It's so much bang for your buck on transforming your entire internal state, which then it transforms your entire external reality. So I love hearing you say that. And I know we're out of time, and that's why I was like, Tara, don't panic. You're not going to be able to ask him every question, uh, but I do. First of all, want to point people towards obviously your book, which we'll link up in the show notes, Radical Responsibility. And we didn't get to talk about the Heart Mind Institute. We didn't get to talk about a lot, but where would you direct people in terms of things that they can
Sure. Well, if
participate
people are
in?
interested in the book, they can go to radicalresponsibilitybook.com and
Okay.
actually get a free chapter there.
Okay.
And actually, if they go on Amazon or whatever bookseller online and buy the book and then put the receipt in there, they can get all kinds of free bonuses as well. So that's
Okay.
radicalresponsibilitybook.com. And then for all of our HeartMind, our courses and summits, heartmind.co, heartmind.co, they can go there and find all about, we put on a dozen transformational summits a year in resilience and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy and expanding consciousness and meditation and rewiring your brain for optimal health and living and all kinds of things like that with all the leading transformative teachers in the world.
Yeah, sorry, a quick interrupt, guys. He's talking like they have one going right now called the Expanded States of Consciousness Mega Summit, and it's like Paul Stamets, Dennis McKenna, Deepak Chopra, Stan Groff, Krishna Das, Andrew Wheat, like so many, just to give you a vibe. Okay, they just needed to know that. Okay.
So you can find, people can find all about that at heartmind.co. Mm-hmm.
All right, and anything else that you would point them towards besides the book and heartmind.co?
I think that's basically, I mean, people can go to my website, fleetmall.com, but
Okay.
most of the work is at Hardmind. And if they're interested in the prison work and all that kind of stuff, they can find their way through fleetmall.com. You can find your way to our prison work sites and all of that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and for all of the huge work that you've been doing and for taking the painful experience that you went through, which we all have, whether it resulted in prison or anything else. We all have those. We all have these kind of painful consequences in our lives of choices we made that were out of alignment in our wounded self. And then we're left to deal with the aftermath of that. And so, thank you for sharing so beautifully how you navigated that and were able to bring so much goodness to the world because of that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for having me, and thank you very much for the great work you're doing to the world.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Inside Out Health Podcast. I hope it's been helpful to you in your journey. If you think that it might be helpful to someone you know, please share it with them. Please share on social media. It really helps me grow the show and reach more people with these amazing messages. And if you could be so kind as to rate the show and possibly even leave me a review, that really helps. So much thanks in advance if you do that. And yeah, please subscribe if you want to hear more of this type of content. I have lots of amazing expert guests on the way. All right. Thank you.